China is crashing towards a childless society. While, surprise, surprise, the Chinese government is finding ways to make the situation even more dystopian than it already is. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Well, it's time to take a break from fighting YouTube censorship so we can fight Apple's censorship. For the last few months, we've been building you an exclusive China Uncensored app. Or at least we designed it, programmed it, and submitted it to Apple for review. They typically approve or reject an app within 48 hours, a week at most. We submitted our app for review more than a month ago, on January 24th. After 2 weeks, we hadn't gotten a response, so we applied to expedite Apple's processing. Still no response, weird. So we pulled that version and resubmitted it, hoping it would land in the hands of a new reviewer. Still no response. Now it's been more than a month. No one from Apple has contacted us, and they won't approve or even reject our app, which they probably won't do because they have no legitimate cause to reject our app. We tried everything we could, and now we're concerned Apple is actually censoring us. But they don't want to explicitly say so, so they're ghosting us. An apple a day is keeping us away. You might ask, Chris, aren't you maybe being a bit paranoid? Maybe. Except Apple has censored China Uncensored before. Back in 2017, we built an app for Apple TV. Apple approved it, but then immediately blocked it in mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Their excuse? Apps must comply with all legal requirements in any location where you make them available. Well, our app did comply with the laws in Hong Kong and Taiwan, but it took 10,000 of you signing this online petition to Apple to pressure them to uncensor us, which was kind of important since uncensored is our whole thing. So here's what I want you to do now. Sign our new petition calling on Apple to not censor the China Uncensored app. The link is in the description. Now, back to the episode. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is great with kids. He gives them important lessons. He shows them how to use a bucket safely. And he even tackles them just for a bit of fun. Plus, he sometimes sends them and their families off to camps for free. What fun! In fact, Xi's many interactions with Chinese children have landed him the nickname Grandpa Xi in Chinese state media. And that's the only nickname he has. The rest definitely aren't censored. And Grandpa Xi and his government are so stoked about children that they want Chinese people to have more of them. To achieve that, in recent years, the Chinese authorities have rolled out all sorts of incentives to try and encourage Chinese baby making, from subsidies and tax breaks for families to free fertility treatments for couples trying to conceive. Some local officials might have had a bit too much enthusiasm, though, like those calling women to ask whether they're pregnant and if not, when they're planning to be. We shouldn't be surprised, given how the CCP treats Taiwan. You can tell they don't respect boundaries. Yet despite all the various attempts, it's not working. China's birth rate is declining fast, resulting in the national population falling 3 years in a row now. And it set the stage for China to become a severely aging society by 2035. And that's coming from my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, and the CCP Health Authority, so the situation might be even worse. Well, maybe if women get calls from even more strangers from the government asking probing questions, that'll put them in a baby-making mood. The situation even appears to be accelerating. It came out recently that Chinese marriage rates took a record-setting plunge in 2024, dropping by about a fifth compared to 2023. That was an even deeper drop than during COVID, leaving marriage numbers at their lowest since record-keeping began in 1986. And with family life in China centered around the institution of marriage, no wedding means no babies. But as Chinese society races towards zero births, it's not just the prospect of an aging society that's raising alarms. In fact, China is heading for a geographic and ethnic sea change, the likes of which Grandpa Xi and his government have never seen, and really, really don't want to see. You see, if there's one thing Xi likes almost as much as growing the Chinese family, it's growing the Chinese countryside. Literally, here he is inspecting a vegetable field in Hubei province in late 2024 and telling farmers how to do stuff. Man, he just loves telling people how to spread their seed. But they love him for it in the rural areas. as this very natural clapping scene suggests. Such trips to the provinces are part of Xi's push to breathe a new life into the Chinese countryside, a central mission of his. Chinese development in the cities, especially on the country's east coast, has long outpaced the development in the countryside, creating one of the largest rural-urban income gaps in the world. At the same time, large parts of rural China are plagued by issues such as soil degradation and deindustrialization. Do you have any helpful advice for that, Grandpa Xi? Any at all? But the declining birth rate is now putting Xi's rural development plans under threat. It actually used to be that higher birth numbers in rural China compensated for the lower birth rates in Chinese cities, but that's no longer the case. Today, births among young people in rural areas are dropping more rapidly than among their urban counterparts. On top of that, Chinese people continue to migrate from the countryside to the cities, contributing to some rural areas becoming severely depopulated, a phenomenon referred to in China as hollowed out towns and villages. And it's especially bad in some of the regions bordering China's neighboring countries. These towns are more hollow than one of the CCP's promises. Not far from the Chinese border with Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, which is formed by the two southern provinces of Yunnan and Guangxi, there have been accounts of border towns and villages turning into ghost towns after locals either died out or abandoned them for better living elsewhere, which is bleak, but at least not as bleak as back when places became ghost towns because all the locals starved to death. Ain't communism grand? In the north, along the Chinese border with Mongolia and Russia, the situation is even more dire. There, the population of the region of Inner Mongolia fell from almost 25 million people in 2010 to just 24 million in 2022. And the province of Heilongjiang went from more than 38 million people in 2010 to less than 32 million in 2020. These declines have raised deep concerns among the Chinese authorities, with one government advisor saying in November that to bolster national security amid a countrywide demographic slide, China should turn its eye to the declining populations of its towns bordering Central Asia. While the ever-glorious Global Times said last year that Inner Mongolia is the northern gateway and the moat of the capital city, Beijing, that shoulders a major political responsibility in safeguarding national security and border stability. The Global Times also reported that the leader of Inner Mongolia had vowed to implement comprehensive measures to attract more people to settle and live in border areas and ensure human shields, national unity and border security. While the population decline is immense, it isn't exactly clear, though, what sort of immediate national security threats could emerge from it. After all, it's rare to see Mongolian hordes come riding down from the north these days. And that's what the Great Wall proudly rises to protect against anyway. However, the Chinese Communist Party is notoriously obsessed with appearing strong. And having large stretches of the northern regions looking like this doesn't exactly signal strength. Certainly not like Grandpa Xi's super tough roughhousing. What a tough guy, and an awesome grandpa. China does have some real reasons to want to appear strong. For example, in the late 19th century, when China also looked weak on its northern front, Russia seized the opportunity to annex vast areas of Chinese territory. Given the state of the China-Russia relationship in the 21st century, it seems unlikely that the Russians would make a similar move again. But then, few thought that Putin would be crazy enough to invade Ukraine, so who knows? His promises are also just as hollow as those ghost towns. In China's southern borderlands, though, the potential effect of depopulation are much more immediate. In the south, the Chinese government has long struggled to assert and maintain control, especially along the nearly 1,400-mile-long border with Myanmar. Not only is the cross-border area a patchwork of ethnic minorities, the dense jungle and mountainous terrain also makes large stretches of the region difficult to traverse and monitor. This makes the region a hotbed for illicit trade and smuggling, including people smuggling, in which crime syndicates based in Myanmar have lured Chinese people into the war-torn country, where tens of thousands are currently enslaved and forced to work as cyber scammers. Of course, this explains why people might want to leave the area. But when locals begin disappearing rapidly, either into Chinese cities or into Myanmar scam centers, there's not much left in the towns to maintain a strong border. But not to worry, Xi has an excellent way to solve all of China's rural problems. He's called for Chinese youths to make greater contributions to rural revitalization. The sentiment was mirrored by an action plan announced in 2023 by the local government in Guangdong province that aims to send 300,000 college students to the countryside by this year, which I'm sure is just what they were hoping to gain from going to college. This plan would have the added bonus of getting unemployed youth out of the cities where they might stir up trouble and unrest and start getting crazy ideas about autonomy and freedom of speech. The whole thing is also a fun throwback to the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 70s, when millions of Chinese young people were sent to the countryside to educate and be educated. Oh, and a whole bunch of people were killed. You know, fun. Xi himself has often spoken fondly about the time he spent in a rural village back then. Those were indeed splendid days, with Chinese youths gathering to exercise with hammers on Chinese cultural treasures, and making oversized necklaces for their friends and loved ones. Fun! But it's not just decline and depopulation that seems to be spurring desperate moves by the Chinese authorities. It's the demographic shifts that come with it. And I'm not just talking about an aging society, because while Han Chinese are experiencing massively declining birth rates, it's a different matter for the more than 125 million people that make up China's 55 ethnic minority groups. Regions such as Inner Mongolia, Gansu Province, and Guizhou Province have all experienced population decline in recent years among Han Chinese. But this was partly counterbalanced by higher birth rates among minority groups. Across China, minorities already made up 13% of the population in 2000. And their population as a whole was estimated to make up almost 9% of the total population by 2020, which is quite a change from the 1960s when they made up less than 6%. Of course, Xi is super happy with all minority groups, and even sends some of them and their families off to camps for free to thank them. Fun! Now, we do have to be a bit careful with these numbers. After all, they're all based on official Chinese figures, which, according to researchers, aren't always the most reliable, due to low-quality data collection, incentives for local governments to either inflate or deflate certain population numbers, and the sensitivity of the issue for the Chinese leadership. This means that the actual minority population of China and its growth could be higher than what the official data shows, which sounds like a good thing, given that many minority groups live in the border regions where Chinese officials are fussing about depopulation. But the Chinese authorities don't seem to be rejoicing about it. For example, one of China's fastest growing minority groups, the Turkic-speaking Uyghurs, saw their birth rate almost cut in half between 2017 and 2019, according to the government's own numbers. That sudden drop coincided with an intensified crackdown on the Uyghur people, with mounting evidence indicating that many Uyghur women have been coerced into taking birth control and subjected to forced sterilization, which, and I'm no scientist or anything, doesn't sound like it'll help in the whole baby-making whatchamacallit. Although few have experienced the same draconian measures as the Uyghurs, other Chinese minorities have been targeted too, including the Mongolians, who have had their language banned in schools, as well as the Tibetans, whose children are increasingly getting sent to Mandarin-dominated boarding schools, while Tibetan educators are disappearing. And measures that weaken children's ties to their parents' culture don't sound like a strategy you use if you want people to have more kids. It's more difficult now for us to know the effect of such policies because the authorities have stopped publishing statistics on the birth rates of separate non-Han groups for some reason. But there are certainly a lot of signs that the Chinese leadership are looking to restrict minorities rather than tap into China's ethnic mosaic to alleviate the depopulation issue. That's not really a shock, as Xi is less the poster boy for minority empowerment and more the kind of guy that stresses Chinese uniformity under the rule of the CCP. But such posturing risks dealing a heavy blow to China's national birth rate at a time when it's already in free fall. And with the current generation of young Chinese people being small already as a consequence of the one-child policy, it's unlikely that there are enough unemployed youths in the cities to revitalize the countryside and plug all the expanding population gaps in the border regions, unless robot college graduates count. So despite the Chinese government's desperate attempts to lift the birth rate, the leadership seems to be willing to sacrifice population growth at the altar of ethnic dominance for the Han Chinese. I guess at least as China approaches zero births, the CCP is trying to make sure that all of China across ethnic groups is heading towards dystopia together. While that certainly sounds grand, it's less Grandpa Xi grand and more grandstanding Xi grand. And before you go, don't forget to sign my petition. Apple, which it just so happens to rely on the China market for more than $50 billion in revenue per year, could be censoring the China Uncensored app by refusing to either approve it or reject it. So click below and sign this petition to tell Apple to not censor the China Uncensored app. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.